The world is like a ride at an amusement park, and when you choose to go on it, you think it's real, because that's how powerful our minds are.
I can tell you from experience, the effect you have on others is the most valuable currency there is.
Don't think, feel. It is like a finger pointing away to the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger or you will miss all that heavenly glory.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Thomas.
Yes, sir?
I don't want you to take this question the wrong way. And
Too late. Too late.
If we're honest with our audience, I did prepare you. I gave you a couple of days because I thought this was quite a powerful one. And it is, could you describe the moment that you realized, the first time you realized that you were not as smart as you thought you were? And let me just let the record state that I think you're incredibly smart. The only reason I ask this question is because I find myself realizing that very often. Very often I think to myself, God damn, Nick, you're not as smart as you thought you were.
Great question. And I'll start my answer because I've thought about it a little bit since. I was like, God damn, what is like the most poignant? Because if you remember, my knee-jerk reaction was, well, that happens like dozens of times a day. Like every single day I realize, wow, my brain does not work the way that I would like it to or that I thought it did. And the example I used in that particular case was my definition of intelligence is your ability to use your mind to recall the information that you've already put in it. Or at least that's what I said, 2 days ago. And if that is the criteria, because that's just an easy, definition to use, I know that it's failing more and more every single day, and I'm quite aware of it. I think the day that you really need to fear is the day that you stop being aware of that, and you just sort of, live through the soup without any thought to, the errors that you're making in real time. But the first time, I don't know if I can pinpoint that exactly. I know I had trouble with math in probably 7th or 8th grade, where everyone around me was really just blowing through this pre-algebra, and I was like, man, I crushed these motherfuckers in reading and writing and being social, and I am really, really struggling with the maths, and it was really, oh man, I've already said really too much. That's how I know I'm not as smart as I think I am. It was a little bit paralyzing, kind of like I feel right now. Like I didn't feel like I had the words or the answers to move forward. And my mother and father, neither of whom would admit to being very good at mathematics, didn't have a ton of answers in that either. They're both like excellent orators, excellent readers, probably a little bit less interested in science. But then I'll tell you another thing, and I don't mean to go off too much on a tangent here, but I think somewhere around college, again, I was deep into literature, deep into music, and I know that my mind works in a mathematical way, because of the way I feel music and time and rhythm. And we talked about polyrhythms before, and I demonstrated it very poorly. But that sort of thing is, my mind flows with it. And I remember being in college and going, why wasn't I ever pushed to be an astrophysicist? And that goes to my theory that I don't think that people that look or behave a certain way are pushed to use their brain to their full capacity. That may or may not be true. But would you agree that you haven't seen too many dashingly handsome world-class astrophysicists, or male or female? Like, have you seen any extraordinarily attractive, hyper-intelligent, science-based individuals? Now, Michio Kaku is pretty dashing, and he has an amazing facility with language, but I definitely think that guy's an outlier, and he's not like a male model. I'm just saying that I think that based on the way, people's proclivities and the way society views them, you're pushed towards certain things, and it doesn't allow your mind to develop to its full extent unless you break away from that and decide, no, I'm going to get a double major in biochemistry and astrophysics. So this is a ridiculous answer to a very straightforward question, but number one, I'll say it happens all the time, and number two, it's very early on that I felt like, man, I don't have the same tools to approach things, let's say, using the scientific method that everyone else did who was in the science. And I have friends that are on both ends of the spectrum, extraordinarily intelligent in the sciences and in the arts and humanities. And I think it's the rare individual that sits squarely in the middle, because you are pushed one way or the other unless you have a very disciplined self-study.
Wow. I appreciate that answer. It brings to mind, I think I've mentioned it on the show before, there's a guy I met many years ago who is very similar to yourself, obsessed with health and longevity and well-being, and intelligent enough to figure out how to maximize those things, using the resources he has available to him, or studying to improve his knowledge about them. And he and I got into kind of an argument or a debate. I can't remember exactly what triggered it, but I brought up the example of Stephen Hawkins, right? And I was saying to him how, you prescribe this very narrow prescription of how to live a healthy life. Like, you've got to exercise this many times, you've got to eat this way, you've got to whatever, all these different things, and they will maximize the organism's capabilities, right? Like, this is what you're claiming. But had Stephen Hawkins been put through that, or been forced to grow and adapt in that way and live that way, like, let's say, had an overbearing parent who wanted him to do all these things, like eat grass-fed beef and do lift X amount of weights certain times a week and blah blah blah, would that have stunted his mental capacities, or would that have created a set of conditions that would have not allowed for Stephen Hawkins, a mind like Stephen Hawkins, to emerge? Right, that was.
I'm just gonna correct you real quick. It's Stephen Hawking, because I can't allow you to say Hawkins one more time. But yes, you're making a great point.
So Stephen Hawking, that's what I said. So he just said to me, he countered with, well, who's to say that if Stephen Hawking, had different genetic potential and or been given different epigenetic environmental factors, that he would have been even more smart. He used to say that isn't a possibility, right? Like, if he had, and that got me thinking, and ultimately that's led me down many different paths, and where I'm at now with that is that it astounds me how often my definition of intelligence actually changes, and how fluid that actually is, because so often am I presented with these individuals who are so astute in one field, so astute, and yet they're blind to the most obvious thing in another vector or another angle. And I see it with myself so often. Like, yes, I can teach jiu-jitsu really fucking well, and there's a very obscure, very specific thing that I can do. I can walk into a room and show a group of men how to strangle each other in a very, very specific way. I'm sometimes, I'm fucking good at this. And then something will happen. It's usually like the mirror to me that puts us in my face is my girlfriend. She'll we'll walk into a room and she will have assessed and noticed and seen things in a way that I was oblivious to, right? And that always makes me rethink and recalibrate my definition of what intelligence is, because there are so many different kinds of intelligence, right? It's
Sure.
you know what I'm saying? So I'm the same. Like, very often I think I find myself, oh, man, you know that show, I wanted to bring it up, that chef show, Chef's Table, that literally blew my mind. You know, it's I know I get my mind blown quite often, but this was one of those things where I just had to pause the show and I had to just stop and take it all in, to think that there is a permutation in the human experiment that has resulted in a guy like, it's Grant Achatz, right?
Grant Achatz, yeah.
Achatz, that has resulted in an outlier with those abilities is, I mean, if we measure ourselves against him using that as a, like, the culinary ability or the gastronomic ability as a yardstick, I mean, we are fucking slugs, and he is like a tri-brained alien hive mastermind, you know, like.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the Beethoven thing, right? It's like, oh wow, one of the greatest composers of all time couldn't hear. It's like one of the greatest chefs of all time couldn't taste. And it's sort of the same irony with Stephen Hawking. Here's a guy with the greatest, arguably one of the greatest human brains that's ever existed, in this gnarled shell of a body that can't do all the things that human beings are meant to perceive or celebrate as the pinnacle or zenith of human experience. I think that the real difficulty, my biggest flaw as a thinker, is my rigidity of thought. And Ashley points that out all the time, maybe the same way Annie does that for you. It's that if things aren't this way, well, they can't exist. And she'll go, well, why don't you be more agile in your thinking and consider this and that? And it's, oh, that's genius. I can't even believe that's an available path to me. And the other thing is that I think the hardest thing for a decently intelligent person is to remember that everything that you think is informed by conditioning of some sort, or circumstantial absorption. You know what I mean? Like, whatever you think, like, if that's not at the forefront of your mind, you risk falling down these paths of rigid thinking where you're intolerant and you're not considering all sides. When you stop thinking analytically is probably when you stop being as smart as you think you are.
Yeah. There's an exercise that I'm really trying to program into myself. And again, that's something we could talk about for a long time. I don't know if you've read that article, that there was a paper, or something came out a while back by a neuroscientist whose, I think the title was, "Your Brain is Not a Computer and It Does Not Process Information." And he was basically explaining how the analogy that we've been using in neuroscience and psychology for years, the one of the brain being a computer and your cultural operating system being the software, it's an analogy that is useful, but it's not true. The brain literally doesn't work like a computer. It's not an I/O device. It's not an input-output mechanism. And when I read that, I remember, like, I was so shocked and relieved and excited by that information, because I'd always say to when I talk to my girlfriend, I'd be like, I talk about the computer and putting stuff in my computer, and that whole time I realized that it was a limitation that I put on myself, and that my mind was not a computer, it was something else. I don't know what it is, I don't know what our minds are, but it's not a computer. So it doesn't have to be bound by the limitations that come with that analogy.
Exactly.
Right? And I don't know how I got onto this topic. That's the thing that I'm training myself often, or all the time, constantly constantly. It's an interesting exercise in mental observation. When you're discussing something with someone, try to notice how often your mind automatically takes the opposing view when they present some information. It's almost just, I've seen it with you and I, and my girlfriend and I as well. Often, like, she'll say something and I'll automatically start saying, yeah, but whatever, and look for the opposing viewpoint.
Right.
And it shows you how mechanistic the mind is, right? Like how it's got these built in, for lack of a better analogy, like little software responses. Like one of them is always, for some people at least, like always look for the counter argument, or always look for, and when you do that, once you start doing that, you start realizing just how limited the mind is, dude. It is such a limited, but I guess we're getting really solipsistic now, but the amazing thing about the mind is it can be incredibly limited, but it is also infinite. Do you know what I mean? And what an amazing tool we have in our heads, bro. What an amazing fucking tool.
And that's what's fucking crazy about it, Nick, is that it's always a choice. And people think, it's the external, it's the environment that is causing me to be this or that. It's actually your choice. You're choosing to be rigid in your thinking. You're choosing to be completely tolerant and seeing all sides. You're choosing to imagine something that's 10x, or you're choosing to decide that nothing can be innovated further upon this idea. It's always a choice. And that's what's so fucking crazy about it to me. Like, that's what gets me giddy. Anytime I get super bummed out, I realize that's completely up to me, And we've had that chat before. But, before we run out of time, I have to find out from you your specific time when you realized when you weren't as smart as you think you are, or thought you were.
Specific time. So many, bro. Just trying to think of one that happened in the last week. Even my business partner often, it's my lack of intelligence in certain vectors is brought into stark relief. Very often when I speak to him, because he's a very, very smart man and he has knowledge in a bunch of fields in which I don't, and very often I'll be again so rigidly focused on a specific belief or course of action, and he'll just come at it from a slightly different angle, and I'll realize how he just blindsides me. And I'll realize, geez, there's a whole aspect of the human experience that I know nothing about. As you know, he's a doctor, so I'm quite interested in nutrition and health and things like that. But and you as well. I know you are as well. But goddamn, when I hear him speak on the subject, I realize that I know nothing, literally nothing. And I think to myself, goddamn, this guy. He went and studied this for 7 years and then worked with it for almost 20 years. And, you read a couple of articles on nutrition and you think like you know something about it. You don't know shit.
Right.
It's and it's refreshing, dude. I think it's a refreshing thing. And one thing is I think you and I need to give ourselves credit. That mentality of knowing that you're not as smart as you think you are, and knowing that you have these huge gaps in your knowledge, that's kind of rare, bro. I don't
you think so?
Yeah, I don't see that too often. Like I especially with hyper intelligent people. I've met some hyper intelligent people that it's almost as if it turns in on itself, that they're so smart that they think they've got everything they need. They think they can start closing off. Like I'm just going to use one example. It's a trainer. I won't give his name, but he's a really respected strength and conditioning coach, and a friend of mine did a lot of work with him for a long time, and we were discussing him once. They had a falling out, and he said to me, he stopped growing. He's very intelligent, but he stopped growing, and I couldn't figure out what he meant. And then I started to look at it as objectively as I possibly could, and I realized that, yeah, the guy, he was so far ahead of the curve that he kind of almost rested on his laurels, or he thought, like, he isolated himself in his intelligence, and he was like, cool, like, I know what I'm doing, I'm the smartest, I gotta stay on my path now. Do you know what I'm saying? Or do you get...
I wonder if I know who that is. I think I might know who that is, but we won't say. Yeah, of course. I think that happens in every field, you know, in every profession. It's only the people who consciously choose to push further that they never stop growing. I think, you know, Picasso was one of those. And I think he was aware of it, though. He was like, you gotta keep going.
Akats is another one.
Yeah.
That's what
definitely.
I was so impressed with. If you're listening and you haven't seen this yet, please go and watch Netflix show Chef's Table, season 2, episode 1. It is an amazing exercise in mental flexibility. Just watching that show, what an incredible thing. Yeah. But I think that's a good note on which to end it.
Agreed.
Until next time.
We're all alone in this
together.
Together. Peace, brother.